This begins the information for general psychology, starting with chapter 1, learning how psychology is a science and what psychology is as a science. So let's get into it. So first off, what is psychology? I'm sure that none of you guys have taken other psychology classes before, at least not in college, because you pretty much have to take general psych as a prerequisite for all other psychology courses. So what are you going to learn in psychology? What is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. So why do people do what they do? Why do they think what they think? Your life experience may shape how you view the realm of psychology. Maybe you're brought up to think that psychology is kind of a bunch of baloney. Maybe you've grown up thinking that psychology is a very noble realm. Whatever you think, however you were raised, can definitely impact the way that you view the realm of psychology. So let's go into a brief history of psychology, just so you have a little bit of a basis to back you up, and how psychology came to be in the modern world today. So before psychology was really deemed as a scientific realm, it was more of like a spiritual realm. So in the 5th century BC, there was something called dualism. This is the belief that the mind does not cease to exist when the body dies, and that thoughts and ideas can exist separately from the body. And Socrates and Plato came up with this idea that the mind and the body are almost like two separate beings, that they coexist, but they don't have the same function. They don't think the same thing. They can be incongruent with one another, or they can be thinking opposite of one another. And then many years later, so a huge jump from 5th century BC all the way to 17th century, so 1200 years later, we have what's called empiricism. And John Locke coined that term, and that is the view that knowledge originates through experience, that we gain experience, we gain knowledge, we gain different vantage points through the things we've been through. We know how to deal with the world around us because of the things we've previously been through. And that, I feel like, is kind of the major start to psychology, starting to understand maybe what psychology is. Fast forward another about 200 years to the 19th century, we have structuralism. This is a school of psychology concerned with studying the individual elements of consciousness, such as introspection. Introspection is an examination of one's own conscious thoughts and feelings. And this is coined by Edward Titchener. And he was very much like, look within. What do you feel? What do you think about this situation? So to be introspective is to look within and examine, what do I think about something? How do I feel about this situation? And then about 100 years later, in the 20th century, we have functionalism. And this is a school of psychology focused on how organisms use their learning and perceptual abilities to function in their environment. So we see kind of a start of that in empiricism, that that knowledge originates from experience. And so now it's, how do we take our experiences and learn from them, and then put it into function into the environment? So how do we then relay that into how we act and how we think? So the 19th and 20th century, that's when we get into the scientific aspect of psychology, and how more like how the brain works, and how we adapt, how we learn, how we function in society. And so functionalism, that was coined by William James. And underneath functionalism, we have a few other people, or under the 20th century, we have a few other people that came up with kind of these big ideas and that are still very well known in the realm of psychology today. So I'm sure most of you guys have heard of natural selection. This is a theory that organisms best adapted to their environment tend to survive and transmit their genetic characteristics to succeeding generations. And that was from Charles Darwin. He was more of a biologist than a psychologist, but it still rings true in the realm of psychology because how are you going to think and act in ways that promote your survival? It's not just it's yeah, so you can pass on your genetic characteristics, which is more the realm of biology, but a lot of it has to deal with the way that we think and the way that we act. If we can't adapt to our surroundings behaviorally and emotionally, then we're not going to survive. So that's how natural selection kind of fits into the realm of psychology, is because the way we think and the way we act determines kind of how we be. And then next is Gestalt psychology by Max Wertheimer. And this is a perspective in psychology that focuses on the study of how people integrate and organize perceptual information into meaningful wholes. So kind of how people work together and how we can take information from one another and kind of create a full coherent thought, and how we integrate with one another as a society. Okay, so that is a brief history of psychology, kind of get you up to date. I mean, I know it's very bare bones, but you kind of get the idea of how primitive the idea and realm of psychology was to slowly but surely becoming more of a legitimate field to study. So there are several contemporary perspectives in psychology that I'm going to go through. I believe there's 6 or 7, and what each of these approaches mean. And some of these, as you'll see as we go throughout these next 6 or 7 slides, is some of these are the names of other psychology courses you could take. And they're each different ways to view the realm of psychology. So the first is a psychodynamic approach. This is an approach to psychology based on the belief that behaviors are motivated by internal factors unavailable to the conscious mind. So we don't know that we feel this way, but our body kind of acts for our unconscious thoughts. And Sigmund Freud came up with this. He talked about repressed urges and how like a Freudian slip is where you say something that you don't mean, but actually you might subconsciously mean it. So maybe it really wasn't a mistake at all. So repressed urges intrude the mind. And he coined the term psychoanalysis. This is a type of therapy that utilizes Freudian concepts with an emphasis on the influence of the unconscious, kind of bringing the unconscious to light is what the psychoanalysis is. The next is the behavioral approach. You might take any kind of behavioral sciences type course, whether that's in psychology or whether that's in education, and how to kind of manage behavior. So you'd learn a lot about Watson and Skinner through those classes. An approach to psychology that concentrates on observable behavior that can be directly measured and recorded. So that is just observing what people do day to day, how they react to certain situations. And one thing that's difficult about that is you can't measure internal processes. So you don't know why they're doing what they're doing, you just see what they're doing. And two very popular ideas that came from the behavioral approach through Watson and B.F. Skinner was positive and negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement would be to maybe give a child a piece of candy whenever they are doing something good, and that therefore that reinforces that good thing that they're doing. You are rewarding good for good. And then there's negative reinforcement, which would be maybe taking away a toy for negative behavior. So that's negative reinforcement. I'm taking it away so that you won't do it anymore. And so that's what negative reinforcement is. And that's if you're solely looking for a behavior, a certain behavior, you're not worried about the internal processes, you're not worried about the emotional well-being or whatever of the person, you're just simply looking for a behavioral response of that you want. So you want your child to behave, you want your student to behave in class, then you're going to reward them when they're good and you're going to take something away when they're bad. And so that reinforces the positive behavior and negates the negative behavior and makes sure that they don't want to do that again. So that's what the positive and negative reinforcement are. I'm sure you've heard of it before. A lot of teachers, parents, coaches, whatever, bosses use positive and negative reinforcement in the world, and it definitely can work. Next is the humanistic approach. This is an approach to psychology based on the belief that people are innately good and that mental and social problems result from deviations from this natural tendency. And Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers came up with this approach to the realm of psychology. And they both like to use the term self-actualization. And this is the achievement of one's full potential, that you are going to do away with these possible deviations. You're going to kind of resist temptation, resist society, and you are going to focus on the good that's within, and you're going to rise to your full potential. And this is how you kind of control your own destiny, is by becoming and realizing your full potential and being the best you can be. You can kind of take control and make decisions for yourself and do the things that you want to do. And that is the humanistic approach to psychology. Next is the cognitive approach. And I've taken cognitive psychology. Maybe some of you guys will take cognitive psychology. What is the cognitive approach? This is a field of psychology concerned with mental processes such as perception, thinking, learning, and memory that seeks to understand how people process information they collect from their environment. So it's not just about, like in the behavioral approach, we're looking at the outward behavior of someone. How about whenever an event happens, it's what am I thinking about? How did I perceive that conversation? How did I perceive that event? What am I thinking about? What did I learn from that event? What did I remember about that event? So, and everybody interprets situations or events or conversations differently. So cognitive psychology is a very interesting kind of subsection of psychology, a very interesting way to approach the realm of psychology. So how do people intake information? How do they perceive it? How do they work it through their brain? How do they remember it? And based off of how they perceived it, they think about it, they learn what they learned from it, how they remember it, then that will then influence the way they behave. And so one reason why cognitive psychology has become more prevalent more recently is because only in the last several decades have we been able to start using more brain imaging technology. So like MRIs, things like that, we can actually see parts of our brains firing when talking about certain things, when seeing certain things, when thinking about certain things. So our brain imaging capabilities have expanded greatly, which has helped the realm of cognitive psychology expand greatly. Next is a biological approach. I have taught biopsychology or biological psychology. I taught that in 2020. I love that course because I've got a bachelor's in biology and a master's in psychology. And that really kind of took my two loves and put it into one. So I highly encourage any of you guys, if that's something you're even remotely interested in, to take biopsychology. So the biological approach to psychology is this perspective in psychology that includes the study of biological bases of behavior and focuses on the structure of the nervous system as well as the function of the nervous system. Because as much as we can learn about how someone processes, what someone thinks about it, how they learn from a situation, how their memories are stored, it doesn't really matter if we don't know anything about the structures they're stored in, the structures of the nervous system that perceive, that think, that learn, that memorize. So we need to know the inner workings of the brain and the nervous system and how they function, so that then we can maybe understand how we perceive things the way we do, how we think about things the way we do, how we learn, how we memorize, how we act, how we feel. No, understanding the inner workings of the brain and the nervous system is kind of the basis of then, okay, well, then now I can learn about all these other approaches because I understand at least a base knowledge of the brain and nervous system. Okay, next is the evolutionary approach. We talked a little bit about Charles Darwin earlier. In when we talked about the 20th century approaches to psychology. So the evolutionary approach is an approach to psychology that explores ways in which patterns of human behavior may be beneficial to people's survival. If you are not, if you do not do well in social situations, and you have quote unquote abnormal behavior in social situations, you may not be able to make many human connections. You may not be able to make many friends or find a mate that will then help you carry on your genetics to your offspring. If you can't find someone to mate with you, then you're not going to pass down your genetics. And so that's kind of what this is saying is, how do we learn how to act in social, especially in social situations, but other patterns of behavior as well, so that we can pass down our genetics to the next generation? Because if we fail, then that's kind of natural selection at its best, is survival of the fittest. I did not adapt to the situations like I should have, therefore my genetics don't get passed down. I think lastly is the sociocultural perspective. And this is an approach in which psychologists examine the influence of social and cultural factors on human behavior and mental processes. Oh, that shouldn't say Charles Darwin and what's passed down to the generations. So don't worry about A and B on there. I'll delete that on the notes. So sociocultural perspective. So this is, how does kind of the norms of society and the cultural norms, because culture changes from region to region, country to country, continent, it's neighborhood to neighborhood, depending on where you live. So how does society and cultural factors change the way that we process information, the way that we believe, the way that we think, the way that we act? And I think it has a greater impact than you realize. I teach social psychology as well, so that's another class that I highly recommend. I've been teaching it for 3 years now. And sociocultural perspective is a part of social psychology. Social psychology is the way people think and act in social situations. So it's with other people. It's a very interesting topic. So these are the 7 contemporary perspectives in psychology, the different approaches to psychology, the different lenses on which to look at psychology. So I now have kind of 7 questions that I'm going to go through. So we have 7 approaches, and we have 7 kind of situations. So first, I'm interested in how people learn to behave aggressively through environmental influences. So out of the 7, psychodynamic, behavioral, humanistic, cognitive, biological, evolutionary, and sociocultural, which one would that be? It would be behavioral. I'm interested in how people learn to behave aggressively through environmental influences. Number 2, I'm studying the advantages of aggressive behavior in the survival of humans over time. So we're talking about survival of humans over time. That would be Evolutionary. My study examines how the brain processes information about threats in the decision-making process and aggressive behavior. So we're talking about brain processes. That would be cognitive. Number 4, I'm interested in studying the unconscious childhood conflicts that might lead to later aggressive behavior. That would be, so the key word here is unconscious. That would be psychodynamic. 5 is I'm studying how socioeconomic status impacts aggressive behavior. Keyword is socioeconomic. That would be sociocultural. My study focuses on the negative impacts of aggression on self-actualization. That would be humanistic. We're talking about self-actualization. And then 7 is I am studying the neuroanatomy of the brain to pinpoint the specific areas of the brain most associated with aggressive behavior. And that would be, the key word would be neuroanatomy. So that would be biological. Okay, now on to the scientific method. I'm sure you guys learned the scientific method probably in middle school, high school. Well, you're going to learn it again. You're going to learn it pretty much the first week or two of every science class you take, of a lot of psychology, whether if you're talking about research classes, because it's something that you guys need to hear over and over and over again, because it's so important to know the proper way to conduct a scientific study. So the scientific method is a process for conducting an objective inquiry through data collection and analysis. So the first step is to identify the problem. What's the problem, or what are you trying to figure out? It could be, what kind of soil makes a flower grow quicker? Whatever it is, what's the problem? Why do people behave a certain way in certain situations? Whatever the problem is. Okay, next is you're going to do background research. You're going to conduct background research, and that would be also called a literary review. And so that's what a lot of research papers are. If you're not conducting your own experiment, you're looking at other people's experiments. And so that is conducting background research, archival research, which if you take social psychology, they're going to be going through that through different research methods. Archival research is one kind. Conduct background research. And then you're going to formulate a hypothesis based off of what you've read about the topic. So, okay, so you want to know why people act a certain way in certain situations? Well, then you're going to conduct background research. You're going to read other studies about what people have done that's similar to what you have done, that might give you some insight. And so you formulate a hypothesis, which is an educated guess, is, okay, based off of what I have learned, what do I assume, what do I think is going to happen from based off of the problem? Number one, identify the problem. So what do I think is going to happen? I think people behave in certain situations because X, Y, Z. That's what your hypothesis is going to be. So then here comes the actual experimenting part. So you're going to test the hypothesis. How are you going to do that? You're going to conduct an experiment. You're going to actually test out the theory. You're going to maybe get participants. You're going to observe people, whatever it is. You're going to test your hypothesis. And then you're going to analyze your results and say, okay, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for people? What does this mean for the future? What does this mean for the realm of psychology? So you're going to analyze your results and say, okay, is this statistically significant? Does this matter? And so once you analyze your results, you're going to then replicate your results. You're going to, so replication is a process of repeating a study using the same methods with different participants. And the reason you want to replicate it or have someone else replicate it the exact same way, just with different participants, is to make sure that the results you got are legit. Because if you can do the same study or same experiment over and over, but with different participants, and you get roughly the same results, well, then I would say that the study was conducted well and that it's valid and your results were reliable. And then lastly is reporting your results, because I'm sure that if you're doing an experiment, you want people to know, you want people to learn what you learned. So in order for you to for other people to learn what you learned, you report your results. So that is the scientific method, 6 steps for the scientific method. And it might be a little bit different from what you learned in middle school and high school, but that's okay. This is kind of the official, this is what the scientific method is. Conducting any kind of background research, your own experiments, reading any kind of journals, articles, books, news, whatever it is, requires critical thinking. Critical thinking is a way of processing information in which a person examines assumptions, evaluates evidence, and looks for hidden agendas and assesses conclusions. This is so important to learn. This is a very important thing to learn how to do if you don't know how to do it already, because you never know what people's motives are for releasing quote unquote information. So some steps to critical thinking are: consider any underlying motives for making a particular claim. So why would this company release this claim? Why would, so let's say a study said that drinking water makes you gain weight. Well, why would a company, maybe, I don't know, maybe some food company releases, or a drink company, let's say a drink company releases, let's say Gatorade releases a statement saying water makes you gain weight. Drinking plain H2O makes you gain weight. And they had data to back it up. So if you're a critical thinker, you could maybe, why would you want to consider any underlying motives for making a particular claim? Why would you want to think about why someone would release that claim saying water makes you gain weight? What could Gatorade have to stand to gain for releasing that statement? Well, people are going to stop buying water and they're going to start buying Gatorade. They're going to give more of their money to Gatorade. Gatorade's going to gain, is going to greatly increase their profits. Okay, next you can evaluate the quality of the evidence used to support the claim. So if you're looking at their data, you might see 2 groups of people that were the participants in this study, and yes, they had some people drinking only water and some people drinking only juice and soda and things like that. But maybe alongside those variables, which we'll talk about variables later, the group that only drank water, maybe they're not working out. Maybe they have to sit at their desk at work 12 hours a day. And maybe they're not getting very good sleep. And maybe they're not eating very well either. They're not providing their body with the correct nutrition. But on the other side, the other group of participants who are drinking only juice and Gatorade or soda, whatever it is. So let's say Gatorade, because Gatorade is putting this out. They only drink Gatorade as their only source of liquids. But they're getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep at night. They have active jobs where they're on their feet a bit. They're working out 45 minutes a day. They are otherwise, besides just drinking Gatorade for all their liquids, they are consuming a very well-balanced, nutritious diet. So maybe the people only drinking water are gaining weight. So they could say, okay, drinking water makes you gain weight. When that's not the variable that's causing them to gain weight. That is not the reason they are gaining weight. So look at the quality of the evidence. If you read into their study and say, hey, that doesn't seem to add up, I think there's something else causing this. Because why would it make sense that people who drink water versus people who don't drink water would gain weight? There's got to be some other reason. Next, generate alternative explanations for the results. So like I said, perhaps these people didn't get very much sleep. Perhaps their food intake was not the best. Perhaps they have to sit on their butts a lot. Perhaps, they're very stressed, and which can cause you to gain weight. Whatever it is, there could be alternative explanations for the results, even if the results truly say that people who only drink water gained weight and people who only drink Gatorade lost weight. It's hard to say. And then lastly, avoid using emotions or personal experiences when evaluating the claim. Well, there was a time when I was in high school, I never drank water. I only drank Gatorade all the time, and I lost weight, so that must be true. Well, just because it might be true for you doesn't mean it's true for someone else. And there could have been other factors at play causing you to lose weight while you're in high school. Maybe you got a lot taller and you finally slimmed down after going through puberty. Maybe you got more into sports, and so you're more physically active. Whatever it is, using your personal experiences or your emotions, saying, yes, that's absolutely true. I love Gatorade. Gatorade is the best. So yeah, it must be healthy for you. That's not a good way to engage in critical thinking. Okay, so we got some questions over critical thinking and the scientific method. So number one, the first step in any scientific investigation is C, identifying the problem or identifying the question. Number two, children who watch violent cartoons will become more aggressive. According to the scientific method, this statement is most likely a D, hypothesis. Number three, after you have identified a problem you want to study, the next step in the scientific method is to A, conduct background research. A way of processing information in which we examine assumptions, evaluate evidence, and look for hidden agendas and assess conclusions is called A, critical thinking. And lastly, if you are reading a review of a product and discover that the person writing the review is a part owner of the product's company, you might question the reviewer's claims based on which of the following? B, the underlying motive of the writer. Okay, now on to different methods of research. So first we have descriptive research. This is a study that enables researchers to observe and describe behaviors without investigating the relationship between specific variables. So you're just looking to see what happens. You're not worried about the reason why. You're just looking at people's actions, the way they live. You might go to another country and observe the way that they live, their customs. You're not looking into why they do what they do, but just simply what they do. We have, that's called naturalistic observation. So this is a study of people or animals in their own environment. We're just looking to see what they do. One issue with that is reactivity. And this is a phenomenon that occurs in situations where the researcher, the participants in the study may be different than normal because they know they're being watched and they know that they are part of a study. So they might know what you're looking for, and so they might act differently because they know you're looking and they know what you're looking for. Another issue could be a situation in which an observer expects to see a particular behavior and notices only actions that support the expectation. So there could be an issue on the participant's side, and there could be an issue on the observer side. And so it's best to use blind observers who do not know what the research is about and thus are not subject to observer bias. So they're just looking to see what people are doing. They don't have really an agenda as to why. So they're just simply observing people without any knowledge as to what the study is about, so they can be completely unbiased. A laboratory study is a study conducted in a location specifically set up to facilitate collection of data and allow control over environmental conditions. So this is kind of like a perfect case scenario. You want to know, without any other outside forces that could impact the results in a laboratory, you can either 100% or close to 100% control the environment, so you get kind of like pure results. It doesn't account for other things that could occur in the real world, other things that could impact that that are outside of a laboratory. Next, a case study is an in-depth study of one individual or a few individuals, and these are mainly used for situations in which it would be unethical to actually conduct an experiment. So this is more of a hypothetical, or this one kind of crazy case actually happened one time. So what would you do? What would be your methods to go about this? But in order to actually go through an experiment or a study about this person or about this situation would be unethical or very difficult or dangerous to do. So a case study is kind of going through through a story, and then what your response to that is what would you do? What are the steps? How would you maybe diagnose this? How would you maybe observe this? How would you study this? So that's what a case study is. And I'm sure especially psychology majors will go through many case studies throughout your 4 years as an undergrad. Surveys are a great way to get information about people, about the participants. So surveys are a series of questions about people's behavior or opinions in the form of a questionnaire or interview. So a questionnaire would be, someone filling out a form, maybe saying, I somewhat agree, I strongly agree, I disagree, I strongly disagree. When asking questions, you might be getting their opinions on something, or an interview, which would be more face-to-face or over the phone, where you are getting information from them. They're not writing it down. You are getting information from their either from their mouths, or they might be responding to you typing on a computer, whatever that is. So we can use, for different types of surveys, we can use self-report questionnaires, interviews, and then different types of surveying would be random sampling and representative sampling. So there's a big difference between these two. So random sampling, so let's say I'm on Northwestern's campus and I want to get kind of an idea of what the student body thinks about a certain topic. Okay. I want to know, what do Northwestern students think about the football team? Okay, what do Northwestern students think about the current status of the football team? So if I want to get an overall idea of what the Northwestern student body thinks, but I don't want to ask each individual Northwestern student. That'd be a couple thousand people. That'd be way too many people. Let's say I just want to ask 50 people. That's doable. That's doable in a couple of days or even a day. What if I want to ask 50 people what they think about the Northwestern football team? Well, then if I used a random sampling, then I would maybe stand outside of the door of the athletics building and ask the first 50 people that walked by me, because that would be the most convenient, because I don't have to move around. I don't have to go search out for people. I'm just going to stand in one spot, and the first 50 people that come up to me, I'm going to ask their opinion, and then case closed. I'm done. I'm done asking questions. That is my sample of Northwestern students. Well, what's the likelihood that that is a true representation of the whole student body? Because I'm more likely to get, one, more football players, but more athletes. I'm more likely to get health and sports science majors. I'm more likely to get people more involved with athletics. I'm not as likely to get science majors or education majors or band players or art people that are involved in any of the fine arts, or let's see, not as likely to get people involved who are involved in student government or computer or anything like that. I'm just getting one type of student generally. I'm not getting a good representation. So what I need to do is I need to stake out where I'm going to be different parts of the day. Maybe I can go to the student center where more of a diverse group of students are going to be. Maybe I go for an hour at the education building, then I go for an hour at the fine arts, then I go for an hour at the Percival Fieldhouse, and I go for an hour at the library, and so on and so forth. So I get an accurate representation of the overall Northwestern student body, which would be representative sampling. That is the more accurate, less likely to have bias in the results type of sampling. And those are the type of people that I would survey. A more diverse, well-represented group of the whole. Okay. Okay, so some questions about research. Number one, Joaquin went to McDonald's to observe people eating in fast food restaurants. He brought a camera crew and bright lights, and they all wore yellow jumpsuits. Joaquin said he wanted to do a naturalistic observation, but may have had some problems because of what? Well, if you think about someone bringing a camera crew, bright lights, and yellow jumpsuits, that's going to be very distracting. So I would say the answer would be C, reactivity, that the people being observed are going to act differently because they're not in their natural situation. They're not in their natural environment. 2, when you watch dogs play in the park or watch how your professors conduct their classes, you are engaging in a form of what? That would be naturalistic observation, A. A case study would be the most appropriate method to investigate which of these topics? The development of a male baby raised as a female after a surgical error destroyed his penis. A would be the answer, because the ways in which games of boys differ from the games of girls, I mean, that might be, that wouldn't be unethical or difficult or dangerous really to study. The math skills of students in Japan as compared to those of US students, no. Physiological changes that occur when people watch violent movies, no. I would say one, it's A is not a situation that happens very often, and it'd be unethical to do a study over. So I would say A would be the most appropriate method to investigate that topic through a case study. Number 4, a detailed description of a particular individual being studied or treated is called A, case study. Number 5, which of the following questions could be answered best by using the survey method? C, do students prefer a grading system with or without pluses and minuses? Because the other ones, what is the relationship between number of hours of study per week and grade point average? That's not an easy thing to survey, because surveying, you're kind of getting opinions from people. That's not really opinion based. What is the relationship between number of hours of study per week and grade point average? No. And then what is the effect of ingesting alcohol on problem solving abilities? No. Something that's more opinion is, do students prefer a grading system with or without pluses and minuses? Okay, and let's just say number 6, a group of randomly selected participants for a study that matches the population on important characteristics such as age and sex is called B, a representative sample. Okay, now we're getting on into correlational studies. This is really just to see if there is and what is the relationship between two variables. A study that allows researchers to measure the degree to which two variables are related. So what is a variable? A variable is a characteristic that can vary, such as age, weight, height. So maybe you're trying to figure out, in any kind of study, the more you weigh, the taller you are, or the taller you are, the more you weigh. Okay, so there is a relationship between height and weight. So keep that in mind as we go on to the next slide. So correlational coefficient describes the strength and direction of the relationship between the two variables. And that goes anywhere from -1 to +1. So if we are looking at the relationship between height and weight, we're trying to see how strongly are those two related, and is it a positive or negative relationship? So positive relationship means, which would be that the taller someone is, so the greater their height, then the greater their weight will be. That's a positive correlation. They both go up. However, a negative correlation would be the taller someone is, the less they weigh. That would be a negative correlation. So if we're looking at these graphs right here, we've got a positive correlation. So I don't know if any of you guys remember linear graphs, and if you took any kind of algebra classes. So we've got a linear graph right here. So let's just say this is height and this is weight. So the taller you are, the more you weigh. And this graph it would be pretty good to say that, because it's almost in a straight line. All these points on the graph are almost in a straight line. This is called a scatter plot. So, maybe someone right here is 5'2" and weighs 130 pounds. And all the people, and so let's say this is, I don't know, 90 pounds, and this is 300 pounds. This is 4'10" and this is 6'5". So someone that's right in here, 5'2", weighing 130 pounds, but then someone that is 6'5", they might weigh close to 300 pounds. They might be all the way up here, and it's going in a generally upward direction. As the taller people get, the more people weigh. That's what all these scatter plots, points on the scatter plot, are pretty much saying. Yeah, there could be someone that weighs more, that is 5'4", than someone who is 5'10". That totally happens. That's fine. But overall, what it's saying is that the taller someone is, the more they weigh. Okay, this would be saying the taller someone is, the less they weigh. That's what this kind of that's what a negative correlation would say. So here we have people who are 5'2", weighing 300 pounds, and here we have people who are 6'5", weighing 80 pounds. That doesn't really make sense for the situation, but given the graph, that's what this kind of graph would say in general. And so this would be, I don't know, maybe, so we said that the correlational coefficient, so the strength of the relationship, this is a pretty strong relationship. So I would say if it's a positive correlation, it's going to be between 0 and 1. So I would say this is probably a 0.8. 0.8 would be the correlational coefficient. This one, this negative correlation would probably be about a 0.75, 0.8. Really, really strong. Anything above a 0.7 is really strong. And then anything significant, I would say above a 0.5, or maybe above a 0.4. And then here we have something that is kind of close to 0, because say, okay, someone is 6'5" and weighs 300 pounds. We don't really have someone that's 6'3" and weighs like 120 pounds, but then we have someone who's 5'2" and weighs 275. Yeah, there's just not really any kind of direction in which this is going. You couldn't do a negative correlation, it's not strong there. Can't really do a positive correlation, it's not really strong there. So really, it's pretty close to 0. So that's about positive 0.8. This is about negative 0.75 or negative 0.8, and this is about 0. on as a correlational coefficient. If you have any more questions about that, feel free to email me and let me know. Because if this is the first time you're ever hearing this, it can be a little confusing. I understand that. Okay, this is something very important for you guys to know. Correlation does not equal causation. What does that mean? What does correlation does not equal causation mean? Just because two things are related does not mean that it's the cause. Just because in that study, just because the people who only drank water gained weight does not mean that water was the cause. Just because people who are tall, just because people who are tall tended to weigh more does not mean that that was the cause. Okay? Correlation does not equal causation, period. Okay? So we've got some questions that can be answered based off of correlation. Paul records data that indicates that the number of hot chocolate sold at the concession stand increases as temperature outside decreases. We see an increase and a decrease. For example, more hot chocolates are purchased during late fall than late spring. Which of the following statements is the most accurate depiction of this finding? That would be B. There is a negative correlation between the two variables, because as hot chocolate numbers, as the number of hot chocolates he sold increased, the temperature decreased. So that would be like this, that the colder it got outside, so here temperature is dropping. So temperature is dropping. Here is 70 degrees. Here it's 15 degrees. He's selling more hot chocolates. Okay, so that'd be a negative correlation between the two variables. Number 2, all of the following variables except for blank would likely show a positive correlation. Let's say height and weight. Typically, the taller you are, the more you're bound to weigh. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to, but I'd say there's a positive correlation between the two. Men's educational levels and their incomes, I would say that overall has a positive correlation. School grades and IQ scores, I'd say that has a positive correlation. Alcohol consumption and scores on a driving test, I would say has a negative correlation. So I'd say D, alcohol consumption and scores on a driving test. Number 3, a study shows that the correlation between shoe size and intelligence is 0.05. This means that A, there's no relationship between shoe size and intelligence score. 0.05 is so close to 0. When something is close to 0, it means it does not have a relationship. It would look pretty much like this graph right here. There's no relationship. Okay. If this said 0.5 or 0.6 or 0.7, negative or positive, I would say yes. That is a strong relationship. But no, there's no relationship between shoe size and intelligence score. Number 4, golf skill is negatively correlated with golf scores. Golf skill is negatively correlated with golf scores. Based on this information, which of the following statements is true? It would be A, the more skilled you are at golf, the lower your golf score. And in golf, you want a lower score. You want the lowest score you can possibly get. So the more skilled you are, the lower the score you're going to get, which would be a negative correlation. Negative correlations aren't always bad things. Which of the following correlation coefficients represents the weakest relationship between two variables? And remember, the weaker it is, the closest it's going to be to 0. Either way, positive or negative. So negative 0.7, that's a strong relationship. Positive 0.5, that's still a pretty strong relationship. That's still a strong relationship. Negative 0.10, that's a weak relationship, but not quite as weak as positive 0.05. That is the weakest relationship between two variables. B, positive 0.05. Okay, 6, the variables of stress and depression are positively correlated. This means what? I hope you got the answer B. We cannot determine causality with a correlation. We don't have any information. Just because the variables of stress and depression are positively correlated, we cannot come to any conclusions based off of that, except simply there's a relationship between the two. That's all we know. We don't know. We can't for sure say that stress causes depression. We can't for sure say that depression causes stress. um it could possibly mean that there's a third variable that causes both stress and depression, but we don't know that. We haven't conducted a study. All we know is that the two have a relationship with one another. That's all we know. So we cannot determine causality with a correlation. Okay, so we just got done talking about descriptive research and correlational studies. Now on to experimental research. So in an experiment, we have an independent and dependent variable. The independent variable is a variable that a researcher manipulates or changes in an experiment. If you're talking about height and weight, what we might change is someone's height. So that's what I'm going to change. And what depends on the independent variable is weight. So if we're saying, okay, the taller someone is, the more they weigh. Well, if we change the height, then they're going to weigh more. Okay. So the dependent variable is the variable that is being measured in an experiment to determine the impact of changes by the independent variable. So how much we change the independent variable, how much does that influence the dependent variable? Okay. How much water I give to a plant, how much does that make it change? How much does that make it grow? And so the independent variable would be the amount of water I give the plant. How much it grows is the dependent variable. Okay, and then there's what's called a confounding variable, or the third variable, as some textbooks might say. And this is a variable other than the independent variable that could have an impact on the dependent variable. This is something that we're not measuring that actually could have caused the results of your study. That it's something that maybe we didn't account for, something that we weren't looking for, that's the actual cause of the results. So maybe it's not height that's causing someone's weight to increase. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's not the amount of water I'm giving a plant that's causing it to grow or not. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something that I'm not studying. Maybe it's something I'm not looking for. And this is now I'm talking about studies that contain participants, that contain people. Random assignment is the process by which participants in an experiment are randomly placed into experimental and control groups. So what's an experimental group? What's a control group? What does that matter in an experimental study? The experimental group is the group of participants in an experiment who receive the variable being tested. Okay, they receive the water or the Gatorade. Okay, they are the group that is going to be measured based off how much the independent variable changes them. Okay, then there's a control group. This is a group of participants in an experiment who are either given no treatment or who are given treatment that should have no effect. So in the water versus Gatorade, it should be the experimental group gets the Gatorade and the control group gets the water. Okay, because water should have no impact, and Gatorade is adding something to their diet. And so we're seeing what the impact of Gatorade is on people. So the experimental group would get Gatorade, the control group would get water. Okay, there are some cautions with conducting experimental research. The first is the placebo effect. I'm sure you guys have heard of the placebo effect, and this is where you think that you are getting some kind of treatment. You think you're getting the independent variable, and therefore you're acting like you're getting the independent variable. So this is a phenomenon in which participants taking a placebo, which is something that's not real, it's fake. So maybe the people that are getting water are actually getting Gatorade bottles filled with water to make them think that might have something in it and tricks them into thinking that they are drinking Gatorade as if they're receiving treatment simply because they believe they are actually receiving treatment. So that could be, oh, I've got a really bad headache. I really need some Tylenol. And someone gives me a sugar pill instead of Tylenol. And 30 minutes later, oh, my headache is all better. Thank you so much. That Tylenol helps so much. That's a placebo effect. It's because I think I'm going to get better that I actually get better. Okay. So a way to deal with the placebo effect to prevent this from happening, you can have a single blind experiment, which is where your participants don't know if they are in the experimental or control group. And so they don't know whether to have the placebo effect because they don't know which group they're going to be in. Okay. But the best, most sure way to reduce the possibility of the placebo effect or any bias or anything like that is a double-blind experiment, which is where neither the person conducting the experiment nor the people in the groups know which groups they're in. Okay, and so there'd be someone kind of in the background, or there'd be some kind of sealed envelope. They don't know which group they're going to be in, and the person doing the experiment doesn't know either. So there's no way to treat anyone differently. There's no way for the participants to act differently because no one knows which group they're going to be in. They don't even know what the study is over. So there's no way for any kind of bias to sneak in. Okay, some more concerns with experimental research is ethics. How are we going to be ethical about our research that we are conducting? This refers to the moral principles that guides a person's or group's behavior. So how are we going to treat people humanely? How are we going to do this in a morally upright way? That is what ethics are. And one way to ensure that there is a code of ethics followed throughout a study is through the approval and kind of the guidance of an IRB, which is an institutional review board. Every institution that conducts any kind of studies has an IRB. Northwestern has an IRB. If you go through your research class for one of your senior classes for a psychology degree, if you go through a lot of grad school, a lot of graduate students, like when I conducted my thesis in my capstone project for my master's, I had to go through the IRB and submit my proposal so that they could make sure that what I was going to study is something that would be ethical. So the IRB is an ethics review panel established by a publicly funded research institution to evaluate all proposed research by that institution. So it makes sure that you obtain informed consent from all the participants in your study. So they know what's going on and they are knowingly signing their name to saying, yes, I will participate and I understand what I'm participating in. Helps minimize harm to participants. It goes, it reviews kind of what your steps are going to be, and they make sure that that's not going to harm people, or if it does, it's minimal harm, and the takeaway from the study is worth any harm it could bring to anybody. 3, avoid deception when possible. 4, it ensures that there's voluntary withdrawal from research, that any participant at any time could say, I'm sorry, I'm out. I don't want to do this anymore. And then 5, it helps protect the confidentiality of participants. Okay, we've got a few more questions to go over for kind of for review. Okay, so let's see. The administration of Midwest State University wants to know if the arrangement of chairs affects students' participation in classrooms. They arranged the chairs in 2 different ways: theater style and circular, and then measure participation. In this study, blank is the independent variable and blank is the dependent variable. It would be A. So they change the arrangement of chairs. There's two different types. Okay, so those are the independent variables. And then student participation is what's measured. It's the dependent variable. It depends on the way that the chairs are arranged. So that would be A. Okay, number 2, experiments are more valuable than other research methods because they what? D, they allow determination of cause-effect relationships. These other types of studies, so let's see, descriptive research and correlational research, they can't go into cause and effect. The only thing that can is experimental studies. They can determine what caused something and what's the effect of that. That'd be D. Number 3, in a laboratory, children are given either a beverage with sugar or one without sugar. The experimenter measures the level of hyperactivity in the children following consumption of the beverage. The experimental group in this scenario consists of children who what? E, drink the beverage without sugar. They're not getting that thing added to their drink. They're not getting any amount of sugar added to their drink, which would be the amount of sugar is the independent variable, or the presence of sugar would be the independent variable, and hyperactivity in the children would be the dependent variable. Okay. Number 4, Isabella is planning on studying the influence of intelligence on the ability to recall events from the 1960s. If Isabella does not account for variables such as age, which could also influence one's ability to recall these events, age could be considered a blank variable. D, confounding variable. Number 5, which of the following is correct concerning random assignment? A, in random assignment, each participation has an equal chance of being assigned to each condition. Because if it were alphabetically, that wouldn't be random. If it was by birth date, it wouldn't be random. And it can't be determined only after an experiment is over, because then they're not really in any kind of group. So random assignment, each participant has an equal chance of being in either group. Okay, that is the end of chapter 1. I'm excited for this class, and I hope you are too. Email me if you have any questions over any of this material, and have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.